Welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Mark Loveday, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm the headmaster of Frewham College, an independent co-educational day and boarding school for students aged 7 to 19, specialising in dyslexia and co-occurring specific learning difficulties. I'm a specialist teacher at SLE, the Specialist Leader of Education for SEND. I've taught across primary, secondary and sixth form in both mainstream and specialist settings, holding a variety of different leadership roles. I've previously set up and led SEND advisory teaching services, being responsible for the creation of diagnostic pathways for dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and created and led alternative provision for students experiencing emotional-based school avoidance, which won Alternative Provision of the Year in 2023. I'm also a board director for the SBLD Assessment Standards Committee and a trustee responsible for SEND across a multi-academy trust. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in primary settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to welcome back Dale Pickles today as our guest. Dale, great to see you. How are you?
I'm good. I've got some chocolate with me, which is always good for podcasting, I find.
Absolutely. I have not got chocolate. I feel a bit left out. So when you can't kind of virtually pass any on a podcast. Have to get that sorted for next time, I think. Before we get started, though, could you just give us a bit of an introduction about yourself?
I'm the managing director of B Squared, and we here at B Squared, we produce assessment mainly for pupils with SEND. So we're breaking down the curriculum into smaller steps. So if you're struggling to show progress from early years through to age 25, we can show those smaller steps of progress to identify barriers, identify next steps, and show that progress is being made. And I'm also the host of the Sendcast, a podcast really focusing on special educational needs and disabilities and sharing information with everyone who works in the sector, as well as parents as well.
Amazing. And, on the last episode, we also spoke about the exciting work that you're also doing around the assessment framework, as well as to, whether a young person is actually, kind of ready for that school focus that we spoke of in episode 2. So really looking forward to seeing that. Thank you. So focus on this episode is we're going to be looking at what ADHD looks like in practical terms, and kind of what considerations kind of early years practitioners can make to support our pupils into that kind of inclusive practice to really kind of unlock that barrier to learning and really push our students to achieve the best they possibly can in the most supportive environment available. So in terms of looking at ADHD, again, over the last couple of episodes, we've kind of unpicked the fact that we've moved from ADHD and ADD to ADHD, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, and ADHD kind of inattentive subtypes. What are we going to see in the classroom environment in terms of the everyday kind of classroom teacher in their setting? What are they going to see in terms of perhaps access to workload or output or keeping up in class? What are those early flaggers?
So if we go for that hyperactivity and impulsivity side first. So with that hyperactivity, we kind of know that child who literally is powered by Duracell, running everywhere, always on the move. If you give them a choice of activities, it could be sitting, doing some writing, doing some art, climbing, dressing up, playing. They're going to be doing those activities. They're not going to be sitting there. So you might see those children choosing the more physical activities, the more exploration. They're going to struggle sitting still. So that's part of the reason they won't kind of be able to sit there and do the writing. They maybe have attention difficulties, but that they cannot sit still. So if you're having reading time and everyone sits on the mat and you've got a child who just cannot sit still, that's going to be in this hyperactivity. One who's always loud, the one who's always kind of really loud, making noise and not maybe being aware of that noise they're making. And again, the difficulty with quiet activities, they kind of need that noise. And some of that is getting into sensory seeking stuff. And with that impulsivity, there's always that child who struggles to wait their turn. Whether or not you ask them to put their hand up to answer or they want it to be their turn, blurting out, interrupting. Also, maybe not noticing danger. So the child who's maybe running across the road without looking, or maybe running when they should be walking, or maybe climbing on the bits of the climbing frame they're not supposed to be on.
Yeah.
They're kind of just, they want to see what it's like. They want to see. And also those who kind of taking things. They just walk up and they take something without asking. Maybe they're allowed to, but actually there's maybe a process. So it's just that, I want that, I'm having it. So it's and when we see this, all of that can seem really rude, but it's not meant as rude. It is unintentional. They do not, they struggle to see that they can't. If I want that, why can't I take it?
Yeah.
And those two there, that's when we think of ADHD, that's probably the stuff people think of.
Yeah. Would you say that ADHD, kind of the hyperactivity and the impulsivity, is where people's minds go straight away when we say ADHD?
Definitely. When you say ADHD, it's going to be that child running around who's at the play area for 6 hours and hasn't got tired out yet, is getting hurt, falling over, upsetting others because they're taking things off them or they're not waiting their turn. And we also, and as parents, you'll see another child in the playground, and even you can see the child who is, you may not know what it is, but you know that child you may not invite over because they may break toys, they may appear rude, they may not sit down to, it's those sorts of things, are not sit down to eat dinner and things like that. You'll see it as they're not following the rules and they're not doing what they should do. So you kind of can see those behaviors really, they kind of stand out compared to others.
Completely. So we kind of get that. It's more symptomatic, isn't it, in terms of, like you say, the bits that we are picking up on. But again, the impact is going to be huge, isn't it? Because we are absolutely obsessed with exercise books in this country, and everything having to be in books. Yes. And we're not going to get the same levels of output, are we?
No, because they're not going to be doing. They are literally going to be distracting themselves with doing anything else. So somebody walking past the window, they'll want to know what it is. They'll stand up, they'll look outside the window and then tell everyone else what they're seeing. So they're not sitting, while everyone else is working, they're looking out the window. They are daydreaming. They're watching what you're doing if you're getting ready for the next task and asking you questions about what you're doing. They're not thinking about what they should be doing. So yeah, very easily with that hyperactivity, with that impulsivity, it's what else is going on that is more interesting than what I'm supposed to do.
Absolutely. And I think, we spoke on the previous episode about that kind of co-regulation and the need to be teaching our young people these skills. And if you think about our kind of primary throughput, we've got reception class teaching with some absolutely wonderful things that go on in terms of early education, and you can see lots of lovely ideas from Alistair's previous podcast with TTS. But you think we take them from that without necessarily teaching those kind of co-regulation, that self-regulation, that organisation skill set, and we throw our little bunnies into year one. And they're sat at tables, and already we're going, right, come on, you're going to get through 4 different exercise books today. And then we wonder why they're switching off learning, why we're starting to see it's really challenging for them to engage with learning. So I would say ADHD, one of the first things that often used to get flagged to us when in the advisory services was very much around this, we've got a child with challenging behaviours.
I think if you think in early years, you talk about child-led.
Yeah.
So you have all these activities, choose what you want to do. And you generally are never sitting down and drawing, sitting down doing maths, sitting down colouring. Yet, year one, you have no choice and you're just doing these boring tasks.
Absolutely. And
why can't I do the stuff that I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome to education, because that's going to be the next number of years ahead of you.
Yes.
And then don't even get me started on how many children then out of education nationally. Ugh, scary.
But the other thing I was thinking of is when I was at school, you got changed for PE, and different schools do different things. But you might have a child who can get changed quickly, but they're always the last one getting changed.
Yeah.
So it's not they are slow at getting changed. It's that constant distraction of mucking around, being a bit of a clown, doing everything, but actually the bit that is boring, which is just getting changed back into my school uniform or getting ready for PE. It's those little things you'll see that come across as not the behavior you want.
Yeah.
They're making a choice of not getting changed. No, there's just something more interesting.
Absolutely. And, building on that as well, we're thinking about that, the children that disappear at the end of the day to get their book bag and their lunchbox. And, they've gone forever because actually, isn't that a brand new, exciting world of investigation when I'm leaving the classroom? It's all those little things, isn't it, that we are going to see. I mean, that's the kind of the ADHD hyperactivity and impulsivity element. What about the inattentive? What would be the impact in terms of kind of classroom environments, work, output, engagement with learning?
So if you think about the inattentive, sounds like they're not listening. So if you're doing like you're all sitting in the corner in the library and they're telling a story and all the eyes are on you, but that child again is just watching something else. It might be counting how many ceiling tiles there are. They might be kind of looking at what another person in the classroom is doing. They are kind of easily distracted. So it looks like they're not listening. They may be listening. They may not. That's a really hard bit to do, is you cannot assume they're not paying attention because they will trip you up every time when you assume they're not. But then times they won't be paying attention. They typically have that short attention span. So as you start reading, they're there and then they're going to drift off. If you ask them to do an activity, they're going to start and then drift off. And for me, that was something that I would have great ideas. And for me, I think, obviously can't remember back to me being an infant in primary school very well, but I think it was, I was enjoying the idea in my head that I didn't want to write it down. So I was like, this is a great idea. And then maybe I thought I couldn't write it how I wanted, how I saw it, but it kind of, I wasn't doing the writing. Or I'd get somewhere and forget where I was in the first place. So with that inattention, it's, if you have a child, you literally give them something, they walk along, they see something, they put what you gave them down, and then do something, you go, where's this? You're like, well, I don't know. It's like, you had it a minute ago. It's over there where you were. Oh, yeah. So that forgetting, it happens with objects around the classroom. You tell them to go get their lunchbox. They go to get their lunchbox. They see something shiny. They get distracted by something shiny. As you said, you wonder where they've gone. And you go back to find them, and they come back. They're like, okay, so where's your lunchbox? They never got there because they got distracted. So it's that kind of, what am I supposed to be doing? What is it? It's generally, inattention is not paying attention or looking like, and being distracted by absolutely anything. In secondary school, I got detention for seeing a 7-legged spider.
The 7-legged spider got your attention?
Yes.
I think, surely that has to be in some kind of a record, doesn't it? In terms of,
I was watching this spider going, am I really seeing 7 legs? Whatever. I got distracted by this spider. I told someone else. I got told off for not paying attention, yet I got all the questions right. And that's that bit where assuming they're not paying attention gets you kind of in trouble with some of us who are not paying attention. We are, but you're not using that full part of your brain.
Yeah.
And that's where fidget toys, but with a fidget toy or focus toy, to me, that should be a very personal thing.
Weird.
So if I'm sitting somewhere, no one else will be seeing it. I'll be playing with it under the desk. Or doodling. If you're doodling, it's a great way of occupying that part of the brain so the rest of you can concentrate. So don't think somebody not paying attention is because you're boring. To that person, you are boring, but that's their brain and the way they work.
Completely. And, I think, building on that, though, I would challenge, any kind of teacher, classroom practitioner, educator, could they sit still in a course without fidgeting, without doodling, without drawing? And then you look at what we ask. our children to do every single day.
Just, I was like, I'm asking teachers, how are you all in that staff room training at the end of the day?
Yes.
Are you all model students sitting there upright, or are you marking something? Are you doodling? Are you staring out the window because you had? We know we do the same sort of stuff.
Absolutely do. We absolutely do. And I think, it is about us really starting to think in education. We need to be more pedagogy led. What are we trying to achieve? What is the evidence behind it? And how do we achieve that, rather than trying to have exactly the same school, year groups looking the same, and the same way they deliver it, the same way they model that. I think in terms of kind of going off a slight tangent, in terms of those inspection frameworks, we've kind of had that breadth of curriculum for schools to evidence that. Certainly, mainstream versus specialist have been always judged on the same kind of framework, and yet deliver learning very, very differently.
Very different.
And I think the big one is often that kind of removal of those exercise books in the true sense of everything's got to be written down. So would you be saying that across both subtypes, there would be a discrepancy often between that kind of a verbal ability and what we're seeing getting down on paper?
Often saying it's with that hyperactivity, they're shouting it out, they're blurting it out. With the inattentive, they might not know they're paying attention, but you ask them, they might give a really good answer. But either through getting distracted or and forgetting and things like that, you're not doing the written work, or because holding a pencil or pen is that process isn't stimulating enough, and anything happen around you just distracts you. So I think with both types, you're not going to see huge amounts of work, but one is going to be disrupting others. So they might be walking around the classroom, they might be doing things, and they're the ones which take your attention. But it's the other type who kind of can get missed because they're not demanding your attention. And that's the thing. We deal with what's thrown at us. We deal with what's obvious. That child who maybe seems they've got it all going on in the classroom, when I'm asking them in discussions, they're great, but their written work is not there. That is that inattentive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes back down to it. It's what we're seeing, isn't it? That what we mentioned, I think, in episode 1, that tip of the iceberg often is what we see. And more often than not, it has to be said that that's behavior. And it's understanding, kind of what lies beneath that kind of waterline of the iceberg. And I think that becomes even more muddled and even more about we've got to unpick and dig deeper, because we know there's a huge co-occurrence. Indeed, it's very rare that any of our kind of neurodiverse areas sit on their own in silos. The norm is very much that co-occurrence. And again, on that spectrum, they could be quite significant, or it could just be some traits of, thinking of dyslexia and the overlap with, for example, ADHD. But I think following on from that kind of accessing learning, what is that output? I think it's really important to also be pointing out that, and we did touch on it briefly in another episode, that kind of link between ADHD, anxiety, self-esteem. Just looking at stats, for example, the ADHD Foundation quote, up to 30% of children with ADHD will have high levels of anxiety, and roughly the same would have a sleep disorder.
Yeah, definitely. And it is, so I have ADHD and autism, which is a group called AUDHD, AUDHD. But when I go into a group with others, I'm nothing like them, because they overlap, but they always overlap in different ways. And what you may find is you may have a child with ADHD and dyslexia or autism, but if they're that hyperactive, it's kind of stopping them from doing the work. It can hide dyslexia. So never actually getting down to do the work. If you've never got the work to actually be able to go, hang on, they're struggling with this. People talk about, when I've kind of helped them with ADHD, their dyslexia's bloomed. And it's because you're now kind of giving them strategies, you're putting the support in, they might be on medication to kind of reduce that impulsivity and hype. You're now getting to the point they're now able to do the work, And now you're realizing there's that dyslexia as well. And I found it really interesting. It was only when DSM-5 came out, which I think was around 2005, 2006. Before then, you could not have more than one neurodiverse condition. You couldn't be autistic and ADHD, or autistic and dyslexic, or all three. You could only be one. And that's phenomenal. But we've got to think that children are more than labels. So don't just think autism, this is them. Dyslexia, this is them. I did a webinar, and the number of autistic criteria and the number of ADHD criteria which fit me are really low. But that's because I've learned to mask and learn other things. But everyone with autism is different. Everyone with ADHD is different. When you overlap them, you're now having a complete color wheel multiplied by another color wheel of variations. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned sleep issues.
Yeah.
And it is the winding down, it's the waking up. There's also ADHD, and all that will impact a lot on the socializing in the classroom. So they may not, in the same way they're not really paying attention to the learning, they're not really paying attention or understanding social cues, and understanding if they're hyperactive and impulsive, they're not going to be waiting their turn. If they're inattentive, they might not be paying attention to know what's expected. There are so many things that can impact them socially. So if you have a very boisterous boy who loves sports but is constantly falling out with people, there's a good chance that's that hyperactive ADHD. It's completely unintentional, and there are lots of things you can do to support them, but it is going to take modeling and showing them what they need to do and how to support them.
Completely. I couldn't agree more. And really starting to think about our behaviour policies in schools and ensuring that they're more around that communication, that adaptation, saying, look, it's understanding, restore, and model, rather than just purely a, kind of the penalty-based systems that so many take on. I mean, interesting what you're saying about the ADHD, and all of a sudden, if you're supporting that correctly, be that through strategies, be that through medication, that often other kind of learning difficulties or other neurodiverse areas may come through and become more apparent, such as dyslexia. I think it's really important that we also think, is that purely a specific learning difficulty such as dyslexia? Or is it missed learning opportunities?
Yes.
Because we haven't supported our young people to be ready for learning.
Yeah. The other thing is, if you are that class clown, you're constantly in trouble, you're not in the classroom, you're mucking around, you are missing so much.
Completely. It's kind of a massive topic, really, isn't it? And I think it is that tip of the iceberg. And I think, one thing for all of us really to take away is kind of not just to focus on the obvious.
Yes.
If we do that, we're going to miss an awful lot. We need to really start turning our attention to the unobvious as well, the bits that are more discreet, and to see what's going on for those pupils as well. Otherwise, like you say, we are going to be missing a whole discrete subset in terms of ADHD. I mean, Dale, as always, you're just fascinating to talk to and really enjoy it. So again, a huge thank you to joining us today and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Mark Loveday, and Dale Pickles. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to development sources. Thank you.